The postal systems all over the world at one time were not postal systems. That's actually an odd idea in many ways. They were done by courier and shipper. In the past, mail was exchanged through an intermediate country, and or each pair of countries had to negotiate postal mail exchange treaties and deals for the rates, and or you had to pay different amounts for postage for each country it might go through, depending on which ship or carrier it transported it. And it needed postage stamps for each individual province in some cases. And if there was any kind of argument between any of these entities, this caused problems. One of the things that streamlined this, oddly enough, was imperial states. The Empire of Spain, for instance, at one time controlled most of North America. Everything from the Canadian border, as we call it now, down to where the Panama Canal would be and beyond, was controlled mostly by them, except for the eastern side controlled by mostly Britain, and of course what we call Canada being controlled by them. 1863, the U.S. Postmaster General, which had been appointed at that point, was calling for an International Postal Congress, an IPC. It failed. As there is no nation in the world more difficult to make treaties with than France, it became the focal point of most of this shit, but not all of it. 1874, the General Postal Union began and had a Universal Postal Congress, UPC, as an international legislative body which met every 5 years for its Congress. Otherwise, it existed continually or would be dormant. The first rules that were given out, that were agreed upon between member states that signed up with this organization, was give equal treatment to foreign and domestic mail within the country, meaning ship it equally, don't show bias. Next, use a uniform flat rate to mail a letter anywhere in the world, and accept any stamp from any member nation by agreement. This was the entire point. You're agreeing to this along the entire international route. If a nation did not wish to do so, you had to ship it through another one nearby at your expense. Stamp values were to be given in numerals, not just words, because that would eliminate the language barrier, and it was to use Roman numerals because that would work. No, it would be using numerals of whatever kind. The established one were actually the numerals we use now. Use green for postcards, red for normal letters, and blue for the international mail, but this was eventually dropped. Eventually, the number system was based on the integers 0 through 9, and that was used for the cost, and the namings could be any kind, because again, it was assumed if you got a letter with a stamp on it, it was okay. See also Central America, where they still had the tradition with all the individual countries, or not recognized countries, or arguing warlords demanding their tribute by you buying stamps from them. Stamps are treated in the same way in many countries as printing money for that reason, because they have a monetary face value. So they have similar rules and regulations about it. Hence the reason for fraud and stuff we'll be bringing up in a minute. So, 1878, it was renamed the Universal Postal Union, or UPU. The sole official language of the UPU was, of course, French, because, again, they ruin everything. 1948, the UPU became a specialized agency subset within the United Nations, being adopted as a de facto subsystem. The UN was composed from any other international systems and treaty systems that were put in place, if possible, so people didn't have to go over again renegotiating things and just put it under them, which meant the UN inherited all of the baggage that came with it in 1948, including 6 official languages with Arabic, Chinese, Russian, Spanish, and English required to be used in the French-only system. It was only officially recognized as an ancillary language in 1994 by the French, however, because the French. 1969, if two countries had an imbalance in mail flow while they were using a flat rate and other, a terminal due was done every year or so, arbitrarily set based on the gold franc, per kilogram sent to and from, because mostly this was a shipping cost difference. They would estimate the shipping cost difference and have it paid off, and that worked for a while. The UPU tripled this amount in 1974 and again in 1979 because of imbalances causing large amounts of problem. And then finally 45% increase instead of tripling in 1984, and that seemed to work well, sort of. 1988, a per item charge was added to drive up the exploitive remailing practice costs, because some countries started being remailers because they ended up, by circumstance, being the cheapest place to ship things through. So you'd send things to the country and have them remail it at a cheap rate. Total cost would be lower. So they cracked down on that. 1991, a 150-ton threshold was set up, having a system of separate letter and periodical rates to get rid of this problem again, because people would use shipping costs and book rate. So I would send things at book rate, but it was a piece of electronics. Wasn't able to do that anymore. So anyway, 1999, the GDP per capita, country-specific industrialized versus developing nation terminal dues rule was put in place so that countries that were too poor to actually pay the dues rate changeover could pay for it. Next, because this was based on per capita, a superpower like China that had a shit ton of poor people could get a cheaper rate nationally and exploit the shit out of it. 2010, the U.S. voted with the developing countries to keep the terminal dues low for everybody. 2012, Postal Development Indicator grouping of countries were divided into 4 groups, rich to poor, by the UPU, Universal Postal Union. 2015, the U.S. Postal Service made a net deficit on international mail for the first time. We began to lose money in 2015. It was $80 million by 2017. 2018, after enough is enough, mostly this was due to China, because everybody bought from China, and them shipping stuff was cheaper than us shipping stuff to them. This didn't cause a trade deficit, but a shipping deficit. We have a shaft gap. So anyway, Donald Trump threatened to withdraw us from the UPU, and actually did it, and declared a self-declared foreign charge rate, because there's nothing stopping a country from deciding that, fixing the problem temporarily. 2019, the UPU, Universal Postal Union, Extraordinary Congress of 2019, decided to adopt the Franco-German compromise that they created between France and Germany for the same reason, allowing 70% of domestic postal rates to be self-declared terminal dues to fix it, so that no country, none of them, would have to pay more than the dues required, and it would be based on a system that would still include all the other functions. The idea was to get rid of this deficit problem in a way that would actually stick. And this had the effect of causing Donald Trump to back down, and we are still part of this Universal Postal Union. But for a period of time from 2018 to 2019, officially, on paper, we weren't. We still were doing it, because it doesn't mean anything until the dues are paid at the end of the year. But yeah, that was a big screwed up problem, because in the effort to fix things for everybody else, a couple of countries screwed with each other. This is what happens when you set up hard, fast rules instead of basing it on simple thing. Tonnage. If there's more shipping going to China than coming from China, that's a deficit you need to fix as far as the shipping cost. And running things through a postal system instead of shipping company makes it easy, takes advantage of international system, and causes problems. That means it's fixed. Let's look up the history of North America's mail system. 1851, the Canadian position of Postmaster General, legislative and other duties exercised was abolished in 1981, and the Canadian Postal Corporation held its own CEO and president in place. There was also a minister responsible for the Canada Postal Union, CPC, since then. And That's the history of the Canadian postal system. It's a blurb. They've been basically stable. Originally, they started off being part of England. 1775, the Continental Congress in the United States appointed Ben Franklin as its first Postmaster General and as the head of the Post Office Department, and later was appointed by the President of the United States. But in 1971, the Post Office Department became an independent entity called the U.S. Postal Service, and its executive and of the executive branch, and the Postmaster General was now appointed by governors of the Postal Service, not by the President, as a cabinet appointed position. Donald Trump recently tried to get around this by strongly suggesting his preferred candidate so that he could fuck with our mail-in ballot system. Or not. You decide. Anyway, this caused a real big problem. Now, Mexico's postal service started in 1580 with the Spanish Empire creating New Spain, running most of North America except what we now call Canada and the colonies held by England in general and other colonies. 1907, it was reestablished as the fifth version of the national postal system. 1921 to 1931, it was renamed based on Mexico connecting and organizing with other countries, including Spain and Portugal. It was given autonomy in 1986 to fix corruption and poor performance and spotty usage. 1990, it was renamed again, including Portugal. 2008, Cepomex, Service Postal Mexican, renamed another thing. Now, the only way you can find a Postmaster General for Mexico currently is in a city called Mexico in the state of Missouri. There is no Postmaster General for Mexico, apparently, currently, and may never have been because it would have just been some cabinet member or minister being in charge of it. At times, it was also including teletype and telecom, including literally phone company. So it wasn't just a Postmaster General. It would have been some other name. So we've covered the Continental Congress in the United States, Canada establishing one, and Mexico establishing one. We've also acknowledged that there's an International Postal Union and Postal Congress. We're done? U.S., Canada, and Mexico, along with 20 other more or less official countries within North America as a entity as we recognize it on a map, do not share a Postmaster General or postal system. There is not a top-down system for that. These postmasters are in countries and sometimes states, municipalities, cities, whatever. Wherever there's a need for somebody to be the liaison between the postal system locally, nationally, or regionally and whatever government. That government liaison exists where it's needed. If you originally start off with negotiations between, let's say, Canada, Mexico, and the United States, there is no need for a North America Postmaster General. There would be a Trans-American Postmaster General if you wanted to make one up out of your ass. I should also point out that the UN recognizes an area designation map for many areas. And the M49 area designation map does not group North America together. It groups mostly areas based on culture and language because that's more convenient to them. And they can request that. Canada and the United States do not group with Mexico for the most part as being North America internationally. Someone told me to ask the UPU, Universal Postal Union, who is the real Postmaster General of North America. There isn't one. This is an escape hatch to prevent a liar from being found out as claiming to be that entity when he is not. Using his grammar as a key to prove he is right is a closed universe way of making sure nobody disproves you. You have to use my own definitions to prove me wrong, rather than what I do, which is why I tell you to look up independent definitions and reality to prove me right or wrong. I don't play this game. Saying you can break down the sentence as a quantum grammar Nazi would do is simply fantasy. Claiming there's a Postmaster General for North America itself is not correct because it would require each of those countries to recognize it, which they do not, and one of them doesn't bother even recognizing any of the others. Bye.